Hey folks, this is Joe with the Bold Visions podcast, where I interview people who work with disruptive technology about how they use the power of storytelling to make vision into reality. Now, as always, this episode is sponsored by Raconteur Animation. Today on the show, I spoke with Ben James, the co-founder and CEO of Tubular Network, which is a startup building the future in hyperlogistics. And we do talk about what that is. What is hyperlogistics? Ben was on the top American Hyperloop team at the University of Texas in Austin. And as a reminder, the Hyperloop was a competition sponsored by Elon Musk to build out that idea. Ben previously worked for MagicLeap and VRBO in spatial computing, and he is a self-titled mad scientist and dad. In this episode, we talk about the history of Tubular Network, Ben's background with Hyperloop, his vision for hyperlogistics, how being a parent is actually a huge benefit to startup founders, counterintuitively. We talk about how Ben handles stress and also how he navigates the resistance that comes up with pitching revolutionary technology to these kind of old school companies. This was lots of fun, so grab a cup of coffee or sandwich, and I hope you enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Ben James. Hey Ben, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Joe.
I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. This is something I've been wanting to do for quite a while now, months, to talk to you, help tell your story. We've been working together for a couple of years now, and I've been super fascinated and excited about what you guys are working on at Tubular Network. And the conversations that we have, I always find very fascinating and educational. And so I kind of wanted to be able to share some of that with the world, as well as a bit of your story. So I thought maybe a good place to start would be for you to tell everybody what you're, where you're going, and also maybe the why behind what are you building it, or why are you building Tubular Network?
Yeah, the why is the most important. First and foremost, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. And when somebody like you says that I'm a good storyteller, that's quite humbling because you are an excellent storyteller, particularly in the visual forms. And any opportunity I have to tell the story of Tubular Network, I appreciate that. So thanks for having me. The background to Tubular Network, kind of like my background, how it got started, its origin, and why it exists. I can tell this visually. I am a very visual storyteller. So my origin story is that I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tubular Network, but as a person, I've been just obsessed with how things move for like the last decade, and in particular, being very impatient about it. Why aren't things moving faster and better, more efficiently? So I studied at Georgia Tech with electrical engineering, and I made a small-scale maglev train there. Years later, Elon Musk held a Hyperloop competition, and our team, the University of Texas at Austin, was the top American team, as well as won our second innovation award by pairing up with MIT. So shout out to Texas Guadalupe and MIT Hyperloop teams, as well as my old maglev team at Georgia Tech. It's kind of driven me down this way. And it was while I was working on Hyperloop, I came to the realization that the reason Hyperloop's having a hard time getting to market is not the technology. I mean, student teams were putting together these functioning Hyperloop pods. This one in red that we had is 8 feet long and can go 200 miles an hour in a vacuum while levitating all autonomously. So the technology is not the barrier. I came to the conclusion that selling into cities of a huge tube to move your loved ones at Mach 1 in a vacuum is it's a lot to take in all at once. And I said, what if we made a small tube to move groceries, Amazon packages at 60 miles an hour? How valuable could that be? And that's really the origin of Tubular Network, is iterating over this and obsessing over this concept of how do we move things better. And the purpose behind Tubular Network, the real vision, is this beautiful visual story that you helped me with The real vision of Tubular Network is that one day you order something and it shows up 5 minutes later. That's because your order gets its own delivery shuttle that goes 60 miles an hour nonstop through your citywide network. And this shuttle can go horizontally, but it can also climb vertically, going from underground to ground level. And the receiving experience is you get on your phone and validate you're the right recipient. It reveals the package. You realize you ordered the wrong size pants again. You put it back in and say return, because return should be easy. And the goal at the city scale is to move goods more like we do data. So in our vision of the city of the future, we're able to move goods 10 times faster with zero carbon emissions while actually reducing traffic congestion, because we're taking all that delivery traffic off the road. And where Tubular Network's at now, we've had over 200 prototypes. We are moving goods for our first commercial customer. And to my surprise, it is not at the city scale that we started. After about 500 conversations with customers, we realized in order to get to the city scale, we've got to start in the right parts of the city where it makes the most sense. And that is in industrial parks, where they're currently trucking stuff over a short distance. Because they're spending 1 million man hours a year and emitting 33,000 tons of CO2 on a single campus, it's a perfect use case for Tubular Network to stream goods between these buildings. And so, like I said, we've got one commercial deployment where we're making deliveries of aerospace parts now, some of which have been to space since we started. And it has been incredible to have this vision of what the future could look like, to have a visual of that vision so compelling it's easy to tell people that story, and then to go actually start doing that, delivering that value, literally delivering that value in a couple of short years has just been an incredible ride, and that's why we exist.
That's brilliant. I think that's the first time I've seen you talk over the video actually in that kind of format. I've seen you use it in presentations and stuff, but that's awesome to see that, how those things kind of mesh together.
Well, I would like to thank you and your team at Raconteur, because those visuals have helped me tell that story at this point thousands of times. And the reason that my timing is pretty good is because I've told it so many times, but those visuals, I've gotten feedback time and time again. Wow, this is such a great story. It's so easy to see it and understand it. And in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, it's because it's like a beautiful video. I brain dumped this crazy vision on you, and you and your team came back with this video that told that whole story in such a short amount of time. So I really appreciate you and what your team have done.
Thank you. And it is my pleasure. It's our pleasure. That's why we're here. I mean, you got to make a living, but ultimately this is about doing stuff that we love. So, yeah. There's so many different directions we could go here.
Let's go.
I think as long as it's not going to derail us too much or take, this is obviously a very complex subject, but you mentioned briefly in your presentation about treating goods more like data, and
yep.
The word phrasing that you've used before is this idea of packetizing goods, and to give people context around that, computer networks are built around data packets, and that's how data flows back and forth between computers. And just as if you plug two computers together, the implications of the World Wide Web is not immediately obvious in the packets of data flowing between two computers. I don't think it's immediately obvious the implications of what packetizing goods is for the whole world. So I wondered if you could talk about some of the ideas and where you see this going, and especially the implications for your customers that this idea would have.
Yeah, and the internet and data is like the perfect analogy, because if you think about how data used to move, it used to be like you save it to a floppy disk, and then you wait until you got enough information to save on that floppy disk, and then you take that floppy disk and you put it in your briefcase, and then you travel to wherever you're sending it, or you mail it, and it gets there, and they open it, and then they have that information. Back then, hours or days later, and fast forward in the future, now on the internet, I don't even know where in the world you are, and we are streaming data packets to each other instantaneously. And this is the kind of leap forward that the way that information moves, data moves through this kind of packetization and streaming of data. And I see the same future for goods. As humans, we tend to batch transport things because we primarily move them with humans, and to make sure that that human is most efficient in moving as much stuff as possible with as little human labor as possible. You know, our vehicles have gotten bigger, and therefore you've got to batch more stuff into those vehicles, and all of a sudden you have 53-foot long trailers full of stuff so that one driver can move it. Or you ever get like a UPS or FedEx, a delivery van, they're just like getting longer and longer. I've got 20, 30-foot trucks coming down my street, and it's just like, I realize it's just because it's one human driving it, but the delay that we experience in batching it all together just to distribute it that way, as time goes on, that's going to be unacceptable. Kind of like if it took hours for this video to get across, or days for this video to get across, it's just unacceptably slow. And that's the same future I see for goods. And when we achieve that, when we've got a citywide scale where you could send anything to any part of the city, kind of stream it within minutes, that's borderline teleportation. And at that point, the world would be a very different place in terms of what kind of businesses can exist on top of that kind of platform, that network. Small and medium-sized businesses' ability to compete now that they have like the logistical superpowers that Amazon today wish they had. You know, it's going to be a really cool new world.
I look forward to seeing that world. For sure. So, kind of pendulating back to more of kind of the internal game, your internal game of leadership and Tubular Network, fastest growing company that we've worked with. It feels like every week things are just changing and evolving, and new exciting things are happening. So I'm curious if you have any advice for other leaders or entrepreneurs, or really anybody working in a leadership role, of how can they take care of their mental health and their physical health in dealing with these fast moving, high stakes, sometimes high pressure situations.
Yeah. So my first piece of advice to any entrepreneur or founder, before we get to mental health, is this quote that's really driven me since I've heard it, and it's make no small plans, dream no small dreams. And the idea is that if you have an idea that's a little bit better than what exists today, it's not going to excite people. It's got to be a big, audacious idea that gets people excited. It's got to capture their hearts and minds before you get any of their attention, to book a meeting, to get to brainstorming, their collaboration. And with that comes kind of some, I guess, mental health challenges, in that the definition of being an ambitious idea is that a lot of people are going to doubt it. So ideally, most of the time you pitch your idea, more than 50%, people look at you like you're a little bit crazy. That's a good kind of sense of like, hey, is this idea bold enough and compelling enough? And then the percent that listen to it and are excited about it get really hooked. And I mean, sometimes go to extreme measures and lengths to help you out.
Hmm.
So there comes some mental health issues that like I've experienced in pitching the idea and it basically falling on deaf ears or getting rejected or just torn to shreds in front of my very eyes and called stupid and ridiculous. And if you've never been in sales and experienced this kind of rejection day in, day out, I'm talking like, a dozen times a day by people you admire and respect,
Hmm.
it could do a number on you. And so
Yeah.
it's important to know from the outset that you're going to get a lot of that. And if you're not, it's probably because the idea is not bold enough.
Okay.
And then how to deal with it, there's a, at least a couple of pieces of advice I would give. For one, surround yourself with a good support network. For me, that's my team at Tubular Network. They're incredible. They're gifted. They're intelligent. They're also very emotionally intelligent. And our values at Tubular Network include being open and candid and transparent with our colleagues. We've opened up meetings by saying like, hey, I'm running at 50% today. It's been kind of a rough morning. So just emotionally, if I'm not as excited as I normally am, please have patience. So that's part of my support network. I would say my wife is by far my biggest support network. She's been incredibly supportive, both from a like go for it, go build something big and bold, but also if I'm having a stressful day, we'll just go on a walk around our neighborhood and she'll talk me off an edge or whatever. I also have really close friends who've been very supportive and have been a good support network. And as a founder, I intentionally have a network of other founders, typically not direct competitors, but like they could be in other industries. And just because they're founders going on a similar journey, it's very lonely, it's very intense, it's very stressful. It's good to just connect with those folks because they can relate to you in ways that most people can't. And so like support network is essential. And I guess the last piece of advice is just like know that you're a human driving this whole process and you give yourself a little bit of grace. There's days in which I don't have the mental and emotional energy to run at the level I need to be a good
Hmm.
person, to be a good leader at Tubular or whatever. And I'll take the morning off or the day off for mental health recovery. Uh, it's I guess acknowledging that you're an imperfect human doing this whole thing is a lesson I keep relearning.
Me too. Um, the word grace definitely comes to mind strongly there. That and I find over and over again that in those moments when you were saying um, when you don't have it in you to show up like you need to, when I don't have it in me to show up like I need to, finding that grace is so essential. And it's great too because then that also extends into, like, I can more easily extend that to clients, extend that to my team, and it's an upward spiral as opposed to.
It's hard to extend it to yourself though.
You mean as a starting point, it's hard to?
Well, it's like you could extend grace to clients or to your team easier than you can yourself.
Yes, that's true, and
Yeah.
I think that's why it is so important to start with self.
Yeah.
um, is it makes
So Joe,
everything
I'm here to
else.
learn too. How do you what tips do you have for leaders or entrepreneurs dealing with mental and physical health as things go up and down as an entrepreneur?
Hmm. Um, the support network is huge. Like having people outside of the like that don't know you for your work role that are
Mm-hmm.
that stick with you on a human level, I think is essential. Uh, the grace, like you said, And also, I do have just really practical things that I do. Meditation and cold plunging are actually really
Huh.
top of that list. There have been a couple projects in the last year and a half that, man, if I didn't have an ice bath, it would have been just exponentially harder to get through that without having that kind of reset. It's a reset in 2 minutes. I can go from
Wow.
being completely in my head and panicking to, okay, now I'm back to kind of baseline. I can go into a stressful call.
Wow.
So
That's impressive. You give me an ice bath.
it's worth the suffering. I mean, it's definitely not the most comfortable thing in the world, but I think long term, uh,
I forgot to
you
mention
know.
one.
Mhm.
And shout out to Alfonso at Tubular for giving me
Mm.
this one. Uh, we share a certain attention deficit where we're just going all over the place. And he said, "Have you gotten into endurance sports? You're running or biking or swimming for long distances?" And I said, "Yeah, I started getting into running because I was trying to run a half marathons, training for that at the time."
Mm.
And he said, "Yeah, after 2 miles, my attention deficit can't catch up with me." And
Oh, I
I
like
found
that.
that to be true, as well as very effective for kind of just emotional or mental health as well. If I'm kind of a mental wreck or in a disarray, sometimes I'll just go on a run and just slowly think through it as I turn up the jams really loud and just run, and kind of somehow it helps me get over whatever is going on. And it's
Mhm.
it's usually within 2 to 3 miles that I kind of click into a new gear. So endurance sports, and thank you, Alfonso.
That's a great one for sure. I think a lot of practices like that come back to how do I get out of my head and back into kind of the being a physical human, back into the body.
And I'd also recommend ensuring that you get a good and healthy amount of sleep. But I would be
Yes.
completely dishonest if I just stated that, because I also have a 2-year-old, and sleep is a joke right now. I know it's important, but I'm not practicing it.
That's actually a perfect segue because I did want to kind of ask that same question that I did a few minutes ago. Is so you are running this crazy ambitious company, you have big goals with it, but you're also a father and a husband. So do you have more advice on or insights in how does one hold those things simultaneously as best we can?
Yeah. Let's see. First and foremost, I find that parent founders are in a unique class of how they operate. They
Mm.
tend to be more laser focused. And I think it's because the time that they can spend on their startup is scarce versus somebody who's not married, doesn't have kids, they have all the time, they can do all nighters, it's their whole world. When we've got to be done working to go pick up from daycare or be present as a dad or a mom for dinner, or there's play dates or whatever. It just puts a finer point on getting stuff done during the little time that you have during the day for it. Uh, Work time is precious at that moment, and so I find that parent operators are much more focused, and I really enjoy working with other founders who are parents. It's
Mm.
always an unexpected trait that I discovered. And the second thing I'd say about that is knowing your priorities. Like when you're an 80 or 90-year-old looking back on your life, are you going to look back and regret that you didn't put in another hour into your startup, or are you going to look back and regret you didn't show up for that thing that was so important in your kid's life? And for most of us, myself included, I'd say, family is the top priority. And so balancing it starts with prioritizing and being very open and transparent about that. and then it's never a clean process, like, because stuff just pops up left and right. And so having good communications with your partner and your co-founders and your team is super critical.
Yeah, I never would have thought of that, for lack of a better wording. It's a feature, not a bug, to be a parent founder.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a class of founders who can take a punch, who can operate with extreme sleep deprivation,
Right.
and know how to prioritize things when there's no chance of getting it all done. Like, parents have kind of a leg up on that front, and operating in a world of imperfection. Woo, parenthood, it's right there.
That's so true, and that is the entrepreneurship journey, is
Yeah,
operating in a world of imperfection, and that everything is never going to get done. So you got to prioritize.
yeah. I started Tubular Network. I guess we're considering going full time right when my first kid popped out. We're expecting the second kid here in a month. And when you're thinking about quitting your day job and starting a crazy startup while you're holding a newborn, there's a certain level of gravity that comes with that. But I absolutely think it's a great journey. And if you make that decision eyes wide open, it can actually be a feature, not a bug.
Well said. So back into the kind of left brain stuff here. This is a question I've been very excited to ask you. So the clientele that you're working with in Tubular are manufacturers, cities, governments. You mentioned, well, like auto manufacturing, space stuff, and those industries are often like, they're pretty comfortable in old school ways of operating. They're kind of deeply entrenched, been around forever, and so that can with it carry a sense of resistance to change. So I'm wondering if
Mm-hmm.
you had any advice for anybody in any company they're pushing the boundaries, they're wanting to innovate and do things better and come up with new ideas. How do they go to one of these companies or the leadership in these companies and navigate that kind of resistance that they might get to changing the way they've been doing things for decades?
I've had some success in this area, so I'm going to throw some salt on my own comments and just say that, like, when I get really good at this, and Tubular gets really good at this, maybe ask me that question again. But so far, the way that I found that tends to work more effectively is to approach somebody in an organization, the larger, slower moving mega corporations, and say, hey, I need to bounce an idea off of you. If you go in gunslinging that this, I'm going to sell you on this kind of solution that's going to improve blah blah blah.
Right.
They get a lot of inbound sales marketing material on that, and it's not so exciting. But if you come at it from like, hey, I want to bounce some things off of you. You seem to be an expert in this area, and I'm got this really interesting startup that I would value your perspective on. That kind of humility and I guess like identifying that someone's got valuable perspective to share tends to perform better. And then going with that meeting with that same humility of just trying to learn and bounce the idea off of them. And the folks that I get really excited about know their problem space really well. So you spend 60 to 80% of your time listening, and the other part asking really good questions, and then just a little tiny bit like, what is it that we're doing so that we're in the right zip code? Something like Tubular Networks uses robots and tubes to move goods. Now let me ask you about, so I'm not like presenting or selling. It's all learning focused. And the folks who don't know their problem space well won't be able to give you very good detail, and you'll find that it's kind of a short, awkward conversation. And if that's the case, at that point, I ask for uh, someone with a really innovative mindset. Like almost all conversations, I ask like, who's your favorite innovator in the company? Because even the biggest companies, the ones that seem like they're moving at a glacial pace, there will be somebody in that organization that everybody knows is always pushing the boundary. And even if they're not the one working in the area that your technology is useful for, they are the innovators. They're the translators who understand the company directives and how or if your technology can play to align with those directives, solve their biggest pain points. And I try to find my way to those innovators as fast as possible and then build those relationships, and they'll connect me to the problem space experts that are more relevant to me while helping me understand how to frame it. And so those champions, those innovators, whether they're directly involved with like the account or just kind of a coach of sorts, are invaluable. And it's typically asking the question of like, who's your favorite innovator at your company is what gets the best responses.
Oh, that's fascinating. Is there have you been able to build a profile or even in an imaginary, just in your head profile of what the commonalities of those innovators are? Like, is there a department or a title or anything like that, or is it kind of all over the place?
It's usually like a character, and it's like almost like a Willy Wonka, someone who's just always trying to drive these out there ideas. And a key differentiator to look for is they've made some of them work. Like they try to push the boundaries. They're trying new innovative technologies, and some of them have succeeded. To answer your question more directly, it's been all over the place. We found chief innovation officers have been highly valuable champions, but we've also found down to like supply chain manager, somebody who you think would just be like turning the crank, moving stuff. They're always just worried about keeping up with the demand of their never ending job of supply chain management. Some of the most innovative customers that we've worked with. Folks from the marketing department have helped introduce us to the right people. Folks in the sustainability department have helped us get there. So it's hard to characterize. Like, we know that in the industrial space, we are looking for the operators at the operations level, like supply chain managers or facilities managers, logistics managers. But who becomes our champion is kind of all over the place.
I'm going to steal some of that for sure.
Yours to steal.
So one of the kind of, not issues, but one of the things that we deal with commonly in our customers at Raconteur is helping highly technical people to communicate kind of their passions, which is in the math and the science and stuff, communicate those to a really broad network or a broad audience, make it really understandable. And it's seems to be a common issue especially with technical founders, that stands between them and their startup being a success, is being able to communicate their ideas to everybody in a really relatable way. And that seems to be something that you do quite well, that you have this background in engineering, but like I said before, you're a good storyteller, you communicate well. So I'm wondering if you had any advice or suggestions for people that might be in that situation, or even people in marketing, that this might be what they do every day, but they still deal with the same problems, that they have highly technical products. How do they bridge that gap to their audience?
Yeah. So I appreciate where that question's coming from. in addition to being an engineer, I spent a lot of my career in product marketing and figuring out how to communicate well to, I guess, commercial customers. And I'd say when communicating on behalf of a startup, the first and most important thing to do is to have a very relatable hook. And the words I use at the top of my vision video might vary by one word. Like the vision of Tubular Network is that one day you order something and it shows up 5 minutes later. You could play that the hundreds of times that I've said it, and I bet it'll line up pretty exactly, because that's the hook that just captures the imagination. And so for something like Rack and Tour, something that displays a problem but also the passion is that I keep coming across the most brilliant people with breakthrough technologies, and it's like a tree falling in the woods. If no one's around, does it even make a sound? It's like, it dies because they're not able to tell their story. And I'm really passionate about helping them tell their story in a way that captures the imagination of their audiences. And something like that instantly, I'm taking a lot of liberties here, Joe, so, make it your own. But that describes the problem as well as this kind of emotional hook of like, oh, I need, like, that's a travesty. We got to fix that. And I might not even be in that business and I'm emotionally hooked. And the same with like the vision is that you order something, it shows up 5 minutes later. I mean, it just recalls all these times that you've been waiting on something to show up and all that frustration versus, you want something and just shows up. Whew, that's exciting. So finding that exciting hook that you can drop in the first 10 seconds or less, that's what you look for. And then when it comes into layering in the technology and the passion, I'd really encourage people to stay focused on the customer and, what speaks well to them, what gets them excited, what do they need to know about the technology that helps benefit them. And then if it's something that you're just really passionate about but doesn't benefit the customer, don't say it unless they ask.
That's
they're
so
opening.
difficult.
You just stay really focused on what serves them.
Yeah. I think that's the tough part for anybody. We are coming up on time here, but I want to touch on one more thing that's super important before we close out. You guys at Tubular are at kind of a turning point. You're at a really important point in the business right now, and so I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell people about what do you need right now. Do you have asks for the audience? How can people get involved or contact you and help at all with this vision?
Oh, I really appreciate that. So when does this podcast get published, Joe? How fast?
As soon as possible. I could say next week.
Okay. If that holds true, then it might be relevant we're currently fundraising. We're doing a $10 million round, or maybe I shouldn't say that publicly. We're doing our next round. And if you're an investor or know an investor who's really passionate about climate tech or supply chain or manufacturing, especially in the United States, it'd be worth going to tubular.network. .network is our domain, and learning a little bit more and reaching out to us at info@tubular.network. We're looking for the kind of visionary investors who see this as a long play for humanity and an investment platform for them in the future. So that's one way. If you are in the automotive or aerospace or in supply chain or industrial parks, and you find yourself trucking a lot of goods over a very short distance, what are called milk runs or truck shuttle runs, please reach out to us at tubular.network, because we'd love to partner with you and explore what it would look like to bring your logistics into the next era of what we call hyperlogistics. And, we're also on LinkedIn at tubular.network. That's where we do a lot of our posts. And so like follow us on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, I'll be sure to link to all that stuff in the show notes here, so it'll be easy for everybody to find.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks again so much, Ben, for coming on and telling us a little bit about your story. And
thank you for the opportunity. I
oh,
really appreciate it, Joe.
my pleasure. And hopefully we get to do it again.